Friday, I'm going to move ahead chronologically in the multiple stories centering around my life and my experiences. Stories about my profession, stories about my personhood, and stories about interactions with significant people, most of whom were clients. I'm moving on. The stories are located in the period between about 1980 and the year 2000, a 20-year, 2-decade period of time. Uh, Today, I'm going to talk about how my notion about what our profession is and should become was vastly influenced by my volunteer work in the American Psychological Association, of particular interest and particular import in shaping my understanding of what psychology was and how it was currently situated and could be situated in the fabric of the nation was tested over and over again by my participating in the activities of the Committee for the Advancement of the Practice of Psychology. I served several terms as a member of the committee, and then, since the committee's action was so important to psychologists all over the country, we opened up a pattern. We allowed observers to come. Any division of the association that felt like it was interested in the agenda were pursuing and wanted to participate in the deliberations of the group were welcome to send a liaison, and any state association who had similar concerns about anything on our agenda could send observers and liaisons too. And we were very generous. We not only allowed them to come, we didn't pay for them to be there, but their host organizations did. But we allowed them to participate fully in the debates. The only privilege they didn't have was a vote, but they certainly had a voice. And they were allowed to put matters on the agenda if they wanted to, if they had something that was burning for them. So the room usually had the 11 people who were members of the committee, and there was as many or 30, 40 observers at any one of its meetings, depending on what the agenda was about. It was very lively. And when I was not actively serving, I actually came back as a liaison several times. So I think I was there in that room about 10 to 12 years altogether between my years serving and my year coming as a liaison from somewhere else. One of the things we did was we had an annual fundraiser for a senator or congressman. We had learned, I'll back up. This is a silly story. About 10 years earlier, the Division of Independent Practice, by itself, before there was even a committee for the advancement of the practice of psychology, thought that we ought to start relating to Congress in some way. That things happened in the federal legislature that affected vastly what our lives were all about and what kind of funding there was for various things affecting psychology, research funding, funding in support of practice in one way or another, like getting into Medicare. That was a very major undertaking. So it was time to start doing some lobbying. And how would we lobby? We had no expertise. We were stupid. So in the first year I can think of, we decided we were going to establish an annual Citizen of the Year award from the division. We often gave a Psychologist of the Year award to some member of the division who had done something that was noteworthy, but this was to be a Citizen of the Year award, and it would be given to some public servant. It would be given to a governor or a congressperson who had done something very significant that we thought was in the public interest, way above, over and above anybody else, and we would give them a plaque and make them an award. So we made an award the first year to a female senator whose name shall be kept secret. I don't want to embarrass anybody. And we thought, here we can ask for an appointment time with her, so we could meet with her and give her her award. And while we're there, if we had some legislation we wanted to talk to her about, she would listen to us because we were bringing her this wonderful award. And sure enough, we got an appointment. And we were told by her chief of staff we would have 10 minutes to talk to her. And so we walked in the room. We gave her the award. She had a photographer there. She wanted to have a picture taken of the four of us who went from the division to give her the award. And she held up the plaque of this nice bronze plaque. And the 10 minutes were up and she thanked us, and that was it. We didn't get a chance to do any lobbying whatsoever. So we began to get smart. Wonder of wonder, it turns out if you give people money for their campaign, they will start paying some attention to you. You win your way into their hearts. They're happier to see you again. So a tradition had started. Every year we now didn't give somebody a plaque. We had a 20 or $30,000 sit down dinner that we gave them for coming to the dinner, and it was, oh, I had to rent a tuxedo when I went. It was very formal and poshy, and it was done like those things are done in Washington. We were learning. So what's on my mind today is the dinner we had with Jay Rockefeller. I think that was in 1979, just before the period I'm talking about. We honored him because he had shown some interest in some mental health legislation. I forgot what it was. It was probably about the rights of incarcerated people, something along that line. And he was a Democrat, very liberal man, and it was a pleasure to do this. And of course, I am not a rich person, and I'm not exploitative. So I knew it was going to cost me $1,000 to go to these dinners, and so I worked out a network. I would cough up $100 of the 1,000, and I had 9 friends, and I would say, "It's that time of year again. I want $100 for you so I can go to the dinner." And we're going to be lobbying so and so this year, and here's what's on our agenda to try and push by the way of legislation. And please give me $100 to support this effort. So I raised $100, and I managed to get other people to give me the other $900. Some of us had become wealthy, and they could just write checks for that. I never became wealthy. So I'm there, and the format for this event was uh, one of the staff members of the Committee for the Advancement of the Practice of Psychology would be there, kind of honchoing things, because he or she lived in Washington and was getting to know all the players on the scene. Would make some welcoming remarks and thank the person for coming, and then uh, those of us who were dining with the person who we were honoring were tables that had 6 to 8 people each, and then there was always an empty chair. And the participant would start with hors d'oeuvres at one table. He or she would be there, so he would be just having ordinary conversation with the people gathered around, and we could say to him whatever we wanted to, or he would say to her whatever we wanted to, bring up any topics, be funny, be serious, whatever it was we wanted. And then when the next course was served, the salad or whatever came next, the person would move on to the next table. And finally, the main course would come and they would move on to the next table, and they would finish their dessert at a fourth table. So lots of people had a chance to have some back and forth while we were partaking of the meal with the person we were honoring. And it was usually pleasant, very pleasant. We did give some money to people I hated, and I felt very strained during the dinner. But that's another topic. Jay Rockefeller was particularly charming. One of the things he said when he came to our table, I think we had the main course, so we had him for the longest period of time. He said, "Now I know that the gossip is true. All psychologists are crazy." And so I bit and I said, what's happening here that makes you think all psychologists are crazy? He said, "I come from one of the 10 wealthiest families in the world, and you're enticing me here with $30,000. I mean, he said, that's absurd. It proves you're crazy. You think you can buy me for $30,000? And one of us said, no, not trying to buy you. There's some things that are important to us, and maybe there will be a meeting of the minds. We know that this is like a poker game. Our $30,000 is just the ante for us to get into the game. And at least we can be a small time player because we have the ante to sit at the table. We don't have any more ambition than that. We know the voice of the American Psychological Association is not the same as the voice of the National Association of Manufacturers or the voice of the pharmaceutical industry. But we'll do the best we can. We will do this annual event, and thank you for being here. And so I asked him about his life, and I said, "You do come from one of the wealthiest families in the country, but you chose to move to West Virginia, probably the poorest state in the union, or maybe Mississippi is, but that is a state filled up with poor people. And you moved there and established residency there so you could run for Senate from West Virginia. That sounds like you're crazy. I don't know who's crazy here. That sounds pretty crazy to me." And he says, well, his family, even though they're very wealthy, has always had a record of being interested in public service. And he figured if he was going to get into public service, the best place he could go was to represent a bunch of poor people and do the best for them that he could. And he was very human and very decent and very nice. I really liked him a lot. And at the end of that, he gave us his best take. He said, "You're probably interested in the future of the healthcare delivery system in this country. Here's my best take on what's going to happen." He said, for a variety of reasons, healthcare costs have been increasing each year at a much greater rate than the general inflation rate at the country in the country. There are many forces driving this. And he said, employers who are the ones who agreed during World War II to pay health benefits and have continued to pay health benefits for their workers are beginning to hurt and to worry because their premiums are going up steadily year after year after year. And they're worried that, and the economy is becoming a more global economy. They're worried they're going to lose their position competing for various kinds of products because their costs are going to be greater than the costs in other countries. This is the only nation that asks employers to pay for healthcare benefits. It just adds dollars to what it costs them to do business, and the dollars are spiraling out of control. So you people probably don't like this. The solution that they've hit upon is they have bought the word of the healthcare industry that if they support and help the evolution of managed care so that more and more of the people who need to be patients are under a managed care umbrella, they can cut the cost. They can clamp down on unnecessary treatments of one sort or another. They can clamp down on necessary evaluations and lab tests, and they will cut all the waste out of the system with draconian methods if necessary, and they will put the brakes on the continuing rise of the relative costs of purchasing healthcare insurance. And so, those of you who are independent practice and don't want to participate in healthcare benefits packages of one sort or another are going to find yourself being negotiated with in a downward spiral if you want to continue to take insurance benefits, and you will be much more closely scrutinized. You're going to have to justify your work over and over again and prove to some managed care manager that what you're doing is actually, to use the industry phrase, medically necessary. The belief of those believe in the religion of managed care is too much is being done that's not necessarily medically necessary. It's being done to line the pockets of those who are doing it. And you are going to be called to account over and over again. It's going to be harder and harder to get permission to see clients for lengthier periods of time or to have more visits with them than the insurer wants to give you. And that sounded awful. That just sounded awful to me. I went home from that meeting saying, I am getting insurance checks. What proportion of the money that goes into my business account comes from health insurers, and what proportion is being just paid directly by my clients that I'm seeing? And it turned out that 82% of the checks I was depositing came from one health insurance person or another. And I was having increasing difficulty. I would get letters that we will not allow you to proceed with so and so. You forgot to get pre-authorization. This plan, the person is under requires pre-authorization to see a mental health professional. So we're not paying for your first visit or the visits you've just billed us for. Please, you have to start with pre-authorization. There's paperwork for you to fill out, and they would review it frequently and say, all right, the patient's going to have to pay for those first visits you billed for, but you can start billing us now for the visits ahead. We will give you 3 visits, and then we'll want to do a utilization review after the next 3 visits to see if your visits are still medically necessary or not. And the system began to feel horrible. I didn't want to be any part of it. I didn't want to work for insurance companies. I wanted to work for my clients, and it was going to get lousier. This was being facilitated, of course, by the many professional schools of psychology that had sprung up and the large number of people who were being trained. And now marriage and family therapists were getting licensed in various venues, and we're joining the pool of potential providers. And at one CAP meeting, we heard a healthcare administrator say, I don't have to pay you guys much. There's a surfeit of workers in the marketplace. We're going to negotiate you down to what the market can tolerate. In the years ahead, you're probably going to make about what school teachers make. And because there's enough of you that those who don't want to work for that wage, that's fine. We'll get enough people who will staff the things we need staff, since we're not providing as many visits as we used to anyhow. We need fewer workers, and there's a glut of workers, and we're in the driver's seat. He made no bones about what was going on. So I came home very depressed, and I said, God, I have to get out of this. I don't want to be part of this. And I already had an aversion to the stupid decision we had made to be defined as healthcare professionals in our profession. And I said, this isn't going to work. I don't want to be a healthcare professional if this is what's going to be done to healthcare professionals. And I don't want to be dependent on insurance reimbursement checks if I'm going to try and make a living in this damn field. And I said, I better start doing some more research. And I was really upset for a personal dynamic reason. One of the reasons I had become a psychologist was I didn't want to go into any kind of business. I saw what business, my father was a businessman, and I saw what that did to him, including killing him with worry at an early age. It felt very oppressive to be a businessman. I had a nice romantic idea I could make a living simply being a psychologist, sitting in a room and having interesting, valuable, and worthwhile conversations with human beings. That was a lovely way. I wasn't running any kind of store. I wasn't selling merchandise. I wasn't issuing stock. I wasn't doing any of the kinds of things that my father had to worry about. But to my horror, I was discovering, because of these market forces I'm talking about, that the practice of psychology is actually the management of a small business. Like it or not, I needed to learn to manage that business differently. I needed to find other customers. I had to shift my payment base away from insurance checks to checks that other kinds of people would write to me for whatever I was doing. And that became a daunting task. I put in about a year daydreaming, thinking, trying things on, and gradually I put the pieces of what I was going to do together. And I'm happy to report by the year 2000, just 20 years later, 99% of all the money that went into my account came from clients, and only 1% were insurance checks. Most of them mailed to me inappropriately. They should have been mailed to the person I was seeing, not to me. I was out of it. I had managed to extricate myself. So as I was learning how to do this, I I did 2 things that stick with me. One of them, I started to sound a public call to anybody who would listen to me about what a mistake it had been to sign on as a healthcare profession, to identify ourselves, to grow an identity that we were part of the healthcare delivery system. Instead, we threw away our older identity, as I think I have said in a previous presentation, that we were applied psychologists. We were simply applying what we knew and what was being learned as psychologists to the problems of human adaptation. This had nothing to do with health or healthcare whatsoever. We were trying to help people to live more effectively. We needed to know something about healthcare. We needed to know something about health conditions because they affected the adaptations of our clients, but we were not part of that structure. We didn't work in the house of medicine. Uh, so I was singing that song wherever I could go, and I have a newsletter piece I wrote that I want to read today, which is an example of what I was trying to do. Here it is. In 1981, the then president of the Division of Independent Practice of the American Psychological Association was a colleague named Robert Resnick. He was a professor in the medical school of the University of Virginia. He was a psychologist, teacher, and supervisors of psychology interns in a medical school. And he wrote a president's column in the newsletter of the Division of Independent Practice. And I wrote a rebuttal to his presidential column. Here's my rebuttal. You'll see what was in his column from the points of it I rebut. In the spring 1991 issue of the Independent Practitioner, Bob Resnick wrote a president's column. It was titled, Call Me Dr. Resnick. To me, Bob will always be an old friend, a fellow veteran and a warm ally of battles without number on behalf of the practice of psychology. And while I am more than happy to call Bob Dr. Resnick, although he has warned me that he detests being called Robert, I find that I cannot let the other contents of what Bob set forth in his address to the membership of Division 42 go unquestioned and unanswered. I must admit that I feel more than content to generate the contentious phrases that follow. For the last sentence of Bob's piece is, comments are welcome. As I read and reread Bob's words, became clear to me that I had to write something, for I could not let stand as so many assertions they were made as if the truths they contained were self-evident, and as if they provided a certain grounding and unquestionable fundamentals upon which the very edifice of our calling must be anchored in order to stand erect. Balderdash. I was not an undergraduate philosophy minor for nothing. I shall take a quote from the middle of Bob's column as a point of departure for this exegesis. The quote is, let us start by agreeing that we graduate doctors and that they in turn treat patients. This should offend no one, unquote. You are wrong, Bob. I not only do not agree with you, but I am indeed offended. Of course, I have no trouble with the first part of your compound sentence. Yes, we graduate doctors. But the second portion of the sentence goes to the heart of the polemic, one that seems to me, after all, to amount to an attempt to preempt the definition of the practice of psychology and to tie our practice rather inextricably to the healthcare delivery system. When all is said and done, is that not what your homily is all about? When you boil down your themes, you appear to me to be saying that we psychologists are every bit as, quote, real, unquote, doctors as physicians are. What is more, we have just as right as they do to assert that we treat, quote, patients, close quote. Bob, I cannot sell out my identity nor my values in that way. Neither could I personally imagine a time when I could be satisfied with settling for such a limited or parochial view of what psychology is as a profession. Nor would I demean our calling by lowering it to a status so barely equivalent to the status of medicine. So please get it clear This piece I am writing for the independent practitioner, and I hope it gets published, is probably about the 14th public forum in which I will once again make the same announcement. I have not now, nor have I ever, quote, treated, close quote, a quote patient, close quote. I do not intend in the future to treat patients, and I am not engaged in the practice of healthcare. Bob, I have worked in hospitals and I presently possess full hospital privileges. Yes, I do devote many professional hours to the applications of psychology to persons whom the medical establishment insists on labeling as, quote, patients, unquote, in those settings controlled by medicine and for the less than noble purposes of locking physicians into the top dollar fee and reimbursements available in the healthcare marketplace. You know, there was even a time in my youth when I myself was misguided and bought into the fallacy of using such a deprecating term as, quote, patient, unquote, to refer to those with whom I worked. Eventually, however, I saw the light and remembered from my semantics courses that the symbol or the thing named was not the thing itself. So while I am certainly willing to grant you the right, and I will not scold or criticize you for exercising it, to aspire to a certain sense of parity with your medical colleagues, and to your attempt to assert how very like other healthcare professions is psychology, I want you to grant me the right to define myself otherwise and not to have to join with you. My profession, as I experienced it, is very poorly analogized by comparison to the activities pursued by physicians. And I have no desire for it to be any closer to medicine in its textures. Of the two, psychology is far grander, far more ambitious, and far more replete with important possibilities. So that there can be no mistake between us, I repeat again that I do not treat patients. Instead, I am a specialist in conceptualizing about and working with lifespan developmental challenges and the all too frequently deviant and inadequate solutions to them that characterizes the lives of so many of my fellow human beings. I understand normative and failed solutions to life's dilemmas across the interval from birth to death, and I know how to use psychological principles to create sustaining relationships with troubled persons. Within those relationships, I possess some understandings of how to help those with who may sojourn a while with me, help them to come to a fuller appreciation of the true sources of their distress, to apprehend the irremediable limitations of existence, to find the courage to dare to be different than they have been before, and working in concert with them to find the path out of the morass of anguish that has brought them to my consulting room. No, what I'm doing is not at all analogous to the practice of medicine. On the contrary, the skills I possess and the interventions I must make as I live my professional life feel to me much closer to those states of being and means of expression that are familiar to teachers, philosophers, poets, artists, historians, and cultural anthropologists. In the first paragraph of your piece, you say that psychological psychologists provide healing services, close quote. If you mean that we psychologists inspirit the distressed, the downcast, and the hopeless, as have the shamans, exorcists, and those of a variety in spiritual and holy orders invested with such awesome authority since the dawn of human experience, then I agree with you. But I am afraid that you use the word, quote, heal, close quotes, in the most narrow and trivial of its medical senses. Now I'm ready for the war of dictionaries, only I'm going to use my Merriam Webster dictionary as a counterpuncher for your World Book dictionary. I love writing and I love words, so this is going to be fun. With regard to, quote, heal, close quotes, a critical term in our misunderstanding of each other, my Merriam Webster defines the first definition for the word, quote, to make or become sound or whole, close quotes. Making sound or whole is certainly what I want for my clients. There, I've used that dirty word. Yes, I want them to experience a greater soundness, a greater wholeness, and a grander integrity about how they can conduct their lives. The paltry definition you seem to use for heal, quote, to restore to health, close quotes, is only in second place in the Merriam-Webster. Let us now then come and have our second dispute, Bob. You state, quote, it will surely come to as no surprise that Dr. Resnick treats patients and does not see clients, close quote. No, Bob, it does not come as a surprise to me. You work in a medical setting. And in such a setting, the models, shibboleths, rhetoric, and worldview of the dominant group must be embraced by all who sojourn in that place. You could not go about the environs of your med school yelling that the emperor has no new clothes on, for you would lose your credibility and lose your position. Since I work for myself, however, and am therefore beholden only to my family, friends, and the consumers of my services, I can permit myself to behave otherwise. Bob, I see clients, so there. You list a bunch of definition that World Book gives for your hated term client, close quotes, including, quote, a person or group for which a lawyer, certified public accountant, architect, or other professional person or service agency provides services, close quotes. And somehow come to the assertion that World Book does not seem to favor the word in your view as, quote, as consonant with psychological practice, close quotes. You are much more admiring of the World Book definition of, quote, patient, close quotes, a person being treated by a doctor, close quotes. And you quote the word book as defining doctor, close quote, as a person who knows how to treat diseases or physical or mental disorders, close quotes. It is my position that the definition set forth above, in the definitions set forth above, your world book plays fast and loose with certain values of our culture and does a disservice to its readership. Unfortunately, language is power. The Hebrews are not allowed to know the true name of God because to know his or her name would confer on we humans power over God. From my perspective, the definitions given in my Merriam-Webster are both more sensible linguistically, and come closer to what I believe is the true nature both of our calling and of our society than those definitions in your world book. I shall repeat my Merriam-Webster definitions back to you and in order the reverse of the above. Merriam-Webster defines, quote, doctor, unquote, as follows, quote, from Latin, teacher, one holding one of the highest academic degrees as a PhD conferred by a university, close quotes. Two, one schooled in the healing arts, close quotes. Please note that Merriam-Webster properly ties the word back to its Latin origin. Doctors, Bob, are teachers primarily, and healers only secondarily. Notice that Merriam-Webster uses also healing arts, quote, close quotes, rather than, quote, medical arts. The truth of the matter is that over thousands of years of human experience, societies have traditionally esteemed the learned and the scholarly and have given lesser status to various of its technicians, even highly skilled ones. Physicians beginning late in the 18th century have been engaged in what I believe to constitute a charade, attempting to deny the triviality of their calling, one that is essentially tactical and not at all scholarly in nature, by trying to misappropriate the word doctor for their profession. Aside from physicians on medical school staffs, many of whom possess the PhD degree in medicine, how many docs in the cities, towns, and hamlets of this nation do you believe are critical thinkers who have great IQ points, Bob? Yes, we psychologists are doctors. We teach, we engage in critical thinking, and we can contribute importantly to knowledge. The growing wisdom of our clients about the dimensions of their lives and our collective wisdom as a profession about the meanings of humanity. Bob, I would far rather have myself grouped with lawyers, accountants, and architects than I would with physicians. I feel very comfortable providing applied psychological services to my clients for a fee. I'm pleased to be their mentor and guide, taking as the object of my expertise some life issue or issues that has dropped them into the proverbial slough of despond, as do the members of the other so-called learned professions. I do not give a damn whether or not my clients possess health insurance. I'm happy to be out of the healthcare delivery system. That system is a mad system. It is one in which psychologists will always be lesser players. It is an organized set of interactions that contain hateful and payer hateful payer and sanctioner incursions into the sanctity of the client psychologist relationship, artificial limitations on how the parties to the relationship may act with each other, serious breaches of needed confidentiality, and an insistence that psychology drive itself ever further into its neighboring boundaries with biology if it is to remain creditable to those who manage the folly. And if you think you hate the cost containments on indemnity plan, the folly of the armed services programs that use psychologists, the excesses of managed care, the serious limitations of Medicare and Medicaid, just wait until you participate in the federal health care plan that will be on us around a few decades from now. Your president's column is a call for us to mobilize, to participate with ever more zest and vigor in the movement that you were shepherding here. But no thanks, Bob. I am copping out. I'm going off to be with the lawyers, accountants, architects, and others who have specialized expertise and who contract directly with clients to provide that expertise in the search for a solution to problems clients experience as requiring such learned competency. My Merriam Webster says that a client is, quote, a person who engages the professional services of another, close quotes. Is that not what we psychologists do? Oh, come on, Bob, admit it. Don't you see clients? After all, my Merriam Webster also says that a patient is, quote, a person under medical care. And I know that you're not going to stretch my credulity and tell me that the people who consult you are under medical care. I always thought you were a psychologist, and I would wish you would join me in my effort to differentiate us from medicine rather than exhorting us all to merge. Let me close my philosophical musing by employing a metaphor. The domain of psychology is as a country. Its neighbors on the various sides are the other social sciences, the arts and humanities, history, and medicine, biology, physiology, neurology. We live collectively surrounded by the disciplines I have enumerated. You and much of the leadership of the practitioner constituency in APA have chosen to reside very close to the boundary psychology shares with the last of these neighbors. I have enumerated. I have been to visit you there, and it is a terrible boundary, full of clashes and border disputes. Both you and your neighbors are each hoping to expand your lands at the other's expense, and you are fighting with each other increasingly. I do not blame you for fighting in that manner. Your enemies are vicious and wish to dominate you. Vital necessities of life are becoming increasingly scarce where you are. You battle by wanting hospital privileges, prescription privileges, and parity in fee and reimbursement schemes. You want to push into the general domain of health. I believe that you're going to prevail, but I have no desire to inhabit the lands you are acquiring. They are a terrible place, full of swamps, fetid bogs, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and totalitarian control. The residents are plundered for the sake of their masters, who exploit their suffering for financial gain and for corporate profit. Those at the bottom are kept from being mutinous with chemical restraints, whether legal or illegal. And melding with the representatives of that culture who live there, you are going to lose your souls. I prefer instead to spend the rest of my years at the opposite ends of the kingdom. The neighbors are much nicer here. The other nations welcome us when we visit, and we are always cordial to them. The borders are quite open. The other three countries are pleasant to visit and contain exciting vistas. We have wonderful cross boundary exchanges with their residents and share our ideas and technology freely without rivalry and to the benefit of all. The earth is fertile everywhere. There is no totalitarian control, and it is possible to make a gracious, if not extravagant, living and to take great pride in the special and unique ways psychologists have of organizing things. It is a shame you do not live up here. Won't you reconsider? Well, I don't have to tell you, he was furious and he wouldn't talk to me for a few years after I published that. I'm still proud of it. I loved writing it. And it was a joy. It was, of course, published. It did get published, and I'm happy to say that. The second experience that has formed what is going to come out of me for the next several sessions probably is that, as you can hear in the background of this paper, I have been asked at the California School of Professional Psychology to step in and cover for somebody who was going on sabbatical and to teach lifespan developmental psychology. It was something I had dabbled in a little bit, knew something about, but I immersed myself in reading a lot to get ready for the course, and it changed my life. I came to the conclusion that there was more wisdom in the literature of developmental psychology than in any psychopathology course we were teaching or anything else we were trying to teach graduate students to understand was the true nature of the pain the clients were coming in with them to see. So I began to formulate a workshop. It was a workshop in two parts. The first part was, I have a document here. Maybe I can hold it up. I don't know if this shows. Can you see this? It's called Creating a Business Plan. I had wrestled with how could we alter how we do business as psychologists so we could get away from having to be part of the medical establishment. And the second part of that was a full day workshop, which I will be presenting the details of in subsequent presentations. And the second day of the workshop started out having nothing to do with lifespan developmental psychology. I said, I think colleagues will sign up for this workshop. I don't know if they'll be motivated to, if it's a workshop about business planning and the niceties of how to reform your business practices. And I'm not sure that they can get CE credits for that because that's CE credits are always something that people, some portion of my colleagues will show up for taking a workshop in something if they can have CE, continuing education credit. So we will have a different second day. The second day, a lawyer that I knew barely. I didn't know him well, but I knew he was married to somebody in the profession. So he was a lawyer that knew a lot about so-called mental health law and about the psychology licensing law in various states and about risk management. So he was going to come, and the second day would be a day, a traditional day that all we psychologists have to take every year on the legal aspects of legal and ethical aspects of our profession. So one day would be on business practices, the second day, legal and ethical. And he and I made a visit to 6 different cities the first year. The American Psychological Association Division of Independent Practice agreed to give us seed money to do this. We were going to be paid a small amount of money for each day we were out of town, but the proceeds of the thing would go to the Division of Independent Practice, and they would issue continuing education credits to the people who signed up. We had pretty good audiences. We had 30 or 40 psychologists who came to listen to us in the first year we were doing this. And I hate to talk about him out of school. It wasn't his fault. They really liked the first day that I did much better than the second day, because none of us like going to the law and ethics classes. I mean, it's tedious, it's annoying, it's frightening. It doesn't fill our souls with joy, and we hear the same things repeated over and over again. There are a few changes in the law in some places, but mainly the same things are being laid on us over and over. It's quite a bore. So I suggested I had something to replace the second day with, and maybe he was getting tired of traveling. He could tell that he was not getting a wonderful reception. People were restless. They were yawning, not paying terrible attention to him. He could see from body language that they were hoping he would finish the 8 hours that he was supposed to be up there, and they could go home again. So I suggested I would have a second day. The second day would be using lifespan developmental perspectives to alter our thinking about our practices. And I would teach a compressed thing that I was teaching my students on the Los Angeles campus of the California School of Professional Psychology. I would compress it into an 8 hour presentation that would ask them to rethink how they conceptualized what was hurting the people who showed up in their offices and what interventions were available to them. What ways could they approach them that were different from anything they had been taught in graduate school? And I got permission to go on for a second year, and I really love doing it. And I am going to take the time to provide all the contents of those two workshops in subsequent sessions that we're going to have. So they will be there for anybody who wants to check in and look at them. I still have a few minutes. Let me start with creating a business plan. And by the way, I think on YouTube, my email address is located. I'd be happy to send an electronic version of these documents to anybody who's watching. If you'd send me an email, I have an email file already. I could easily whisk back to you, and you'll have the entire document themselves. Uh, so this goes through various topics like any good business plan would. In stage one, the first thing I ask them to do, they don't have their books with them, their accounting ledgers or their bookkeeping that they do. They don't bring that to workshops. I told them when they go home, the first step I want you to do is do an income of where your current analysis is coming from, your current income is coming from. And I said, I've identified by talking to colleagues, by my own experiences, there seem to be one, two, three, four, there seem to be five ways that money comes into our professional practices. The first way is obvious. We get client fees and or insurance fees from insurance companies. Some of us get consulting fees. We have a gig out in the community somewhere where we go and do something. I used to get paid to go to the counseling center at another university and supervise or run a seminar for the staff of the consulting center. So there's consulting fees we can make. Many of us get teaching salaries. We do some adjunctive teaching somewhere and get paid as teachers. Some of us get royalties. We publish things, and from our publishing efforts, royalties come in. Some of us get some rental income. We've rented a suite and we have excess capacity, so we rent out some portion of the suite, or if we're smart, we make use of the hours. We don't. None of us work from dawn until midnight every 7 days a week. We have hours we're not using our space. There's no reason why we can't rent out some of our space to other people too. And even though it's our personal office, if we don't mind being invaded for a few hours occasionally, we can pick up some extra change, some rental income from the very practices we have and where our office is located. And then I even have another. The last category is other, because I may not be smart. May not have exhausted all the possibilities. So I ask people simply to take a look at their income tax return and their bookkeeping for the previous year and put how much of their income came from each of their categories. And then what was their total annual professional income to get that figure. That's how they complete stage one income analysis. They specify where their income is coming from and what the total is. And I tell them I would like to increase whatever that figure is. And I hope that figure will increase if they listen to my workshop. And I want to reconfigure it. If a lot of it is still coming from insurance reimbursements, I want to try and shift that in the direction of the other things I've listed so they don't have to be as dependent and eventually can stop being dependent in any way on insurance reimbursements for generating their annual income. Then I asked them to take step two. Step two is an expense analysis. What are they having to spend money on? And when I did this myself, I took a look of, I had set up a Quicken log. What I was attributing various things I was paying out to various categories. And I myself, when I set that up, because I'm very compulsive, I wanted to differentiate, I wanted to have a name for of a category for every check or cash expenditure I made. So the list was enormous, and I passed it on to people. This is in alphabetical order. The first one is accounting legal expenses. I could have split them. I could have had a separate category for accounting and a separate one for legal, but these are not oft occurring things. I don't think we have to. If I had a lease I had to have reviewed, I would go see a lawyer that year. Or uh, my malpractice lawyer presented a free lawyer if there was anything I got scared about was going to lead to a possible report of me to the board of psychology or possible malpractice suit. I didn't have to pay anything for that. So it was mainly a review of documents related to leases. And the accountant was the yearly expense I had with the accountant. I wasn't calling the accountant all the time. And my accountant wasn't billing me for anything on a vast recurrent basis. So I was happy to put them together. The other thing I lumped together is advertising and promotion. I guess the only thing I do now that I consider advertising or promotion is the cost of hosting my website. That's the only thing I do. What do I pay? I pay, I think, $64 a year or something like that. That's an annual expense I have. Back then, we've come a long way. Back then, a huge number of my colleagues still had what were known as answering services. They were of a mind, this would even come up in our meetings. I'd be talking to them. I'd say, how many of you still have answering services? And a large number of hands would go up. And they said that they believed that people, if they called up, wanted to talk to a person, that it was depersonalizing to have a mechanical recording device to talk to. Voicemail had not been frequent yet, and only some of us were experimenting with mechanical answering devices that were on our landlines. I was an early adopter of that. I would say I think one of the tests to become a clerk at an answering service is you have to have an IQ under 80. That's one of the presenting complaints. They have a hard time understanding what's an emergency and what isn't an emergency. They tend to chase you for every trivia, and it's annoying to have answering services. And I think people are getting used to talking to machine. They feel like they can talk and they can talk, and it will record whatever they want to say, that it's actually more comforting to have that kind of machine than to talk to a person. But please consider getting rid of your answering services. Then the next thing is auto. I said, I don't know if some of you know this, but if you if you're going between two locations, you can deduct certain expenses attached to having, if you go by automobile, to your car. If you have two offices in two locations, or you go somewhere to teach and then go back to your office again. If you do some work going to other settings, like if you have a guy in rehab and you're going to make a visit to the rehab and then go back again, all that mileage can be deducted. Now, you don't have this visually before you, but there's an asterisk before auto. Auto is the first one in this list where you get benefit for being a corporation rather than being an individual. Everybody, whether you're just an individual in practice and you have not incorporated your entity, gets to deduct some kinds of auto expenses recognized by the Internal Revenue Service. The what you conduct for auto expenses are more liberal if you're a corporation. Like you might be able even to justify leasing the entire car itself and the maintenance on the car and a whole bunch of things that you pay for. That's up to the accountant to work out with you if you decide to get it incorporated. The next expenses is business and malpractice insurance. The expense after that is some idiots pay a fee to collection agencies to collect unpaid monies owed them by clients. And I warn them, as our risk managers do, please don't do that. See if you can collect your money on an ongoing basis. One thing, many people leave you owing you money because they're pissed off at you and they haven't had the courage or the desire to process their anger and disappointment and annoyance with you so you could work it through. They tell you they think you should go fuck yourself by not paying your final bill. And you don't want to make them even angrier by starting harassing phone calls from a collection agency or take them yourself to small claims court, which is your legal right to do. You can do that. You have a right to collect fees owed to you. Do not start pounding on a hornet's nest. That's not a very sensible thing to do. Just eat the money. I said I've never tried to engage in strong arm practices. I've collected over the by that time was 40 plus years of my practice, something like 96% of all the fees I ever billed. So I'll eat the other 4%. It's okay, and I'm not going to deal with collection agencies. Another thing that we pay for, sometimes we pay somebody to consult with us or supervise us temporarily. We have a very problematic case and we want to make sure we're not wandering into some strange no man's land, that we're posing some kind of risk to ourselves or we're missing something we should be more aware of. So we consult with somebody in the profession, some elder that we think would have some good ideas about this case. And usually we pay a fee for that. Finally, on the first page, we have continuing education expenses, all of us. That's universal. You cannot renew your license. Oh, New York just finally made it mandatory. New York was the one state where you didn't have to take some continuing education courses in order to renew licensure. That's the end of page one. I will get you a few more on page two before I stop. Credit card annual fees. Have a credit card for your business that helps you with your bookkeeping that you use if you're going to charge expenses, all your business related expenses, charge on that credit card. And if that credit card has an annual fee attached to them, which many credit cards do, then that annual fee is a business expense for having that credit card. Deduct every deduction you can take. I quote my accountant once. Do not do income tax evasion, but please don't pay any taxes you're not legally obligated to pay. Become wise about what the range of your deductions really are. That's a little overlooked one. Maybe 50 bucks a year, 100 bucks a year, but it is a deduction. It adds to your deductions. Depreciation. You own furniture, you own a computer, you buy other stuff that you stick in your office every once in a while, you buy books. All of that can be depreciated, and your accountant will set up a depreciation schedule. So some percentage of that gets depreciated every year and contributes to your paying fewer income taxes. Disability insurance. Now we get to something that's has an asterisk in front of it. One of the wonderful things is if you incorporate, this is one of the benefits you get for incorporating. Your corporation can have, since you're the employee of your corporation, you may be the only employee your corporation has. Your corporation can have a lavish benefits package. One of the things that can make available to you is a disability insurance policy. If you get disabled, we'll continue to pay you some income. And that can be a business expense if you're a corporation. It's not a business expense if you're a person. Paying for your own disability insurance is not a tax deductible item. Boy, did I make myself smart in a hurry. Dues. Most of us pay some dues to some professional organization. That's clearly tax deductible. Uh, if you take on employees or contract for certain projects that people do something, you can deduct the cost, of course, of being a boss. That's true if you're incorporated or not incorporated. But I start pleading with my audience at that point. Please do not have employees. That's the biggest single expense you could have. And they would say, "Well, I like having a waiting room with a window there, and there's somebody there to greet people when they come, and they keep my schedule for me, and on and on and on. They take messages for me, and I just like having that." I said, "That's very expensive. Do you have that person there 40 hours a week? That's ridiculous. An answering machine will take care of your messages. And by the way, when people call wanting to talk to you, they really prefer talking to you than talking to the person at the window. They would like to talk to you if they possibly could. Please return your own phone calls. Please record them. Don't have a human being there." Sometimes you have a project. Maybe you have a book manuscript and a textbook you're writing, and you want somebody to type it for you. So you'll contract that out. Jesus Christ, learn to use a word processing machine and generate your own manuscript. Don't pay somebody else for doing that. Uh, Billing services, do your own billing. God damn it, learn how to do your billing. Don't have a billing service. You have to get into having a confidentiality agreement with them because they're seeing the name of your clients. It's messy and complicated and opens more risk for you. Do everything yourself and save the money. Next, entertainment. If you go out to lunch with a colleague and talk about a client, you can deduct the cost of that meal. Uh, there's another asterisk by that one because the government is much more liberal with corporations when it comes to entertainment expenses. They expect that corporations are going to do a lot of entertaining. I think they're more skeptical about an individual psychologist doing a lot of entertaining. And I'm not saying that you should commit insurance fraud, but if you have a dinner and most of the people who are coming are colleagues and their spouses, you can probably get away with taking the lion's share of the cost of hosting that dinner. If you talk about any psychological matters or problems or clients during the course of the evening, you can take a big chunk of that probably, and you're not going to get audited if you do that. All right. I think I'm giving you the flavor of this, and I'm running out of time. So I will stop here and I will continue next time. But I am opening this up to my colleagues at this point.
Arthur, going back to I guess, the beginning and the advent of managed care, I want to provide a footnote and also want to get your comment. I Back in the late '80s, I was hired as a consultant by Carl Potthurst,
Yeah.
to work for his developing managed care company, um, and part of the reason for that company was that the insurance companies, I guess, were getting taken to the cleaners by hospitalization of patients in that time,
Yes.
and I think it was probably psychiatrists that were charging upwards of several $100s, and what came to be, many thousands of dollars for a hospital stay.
Yes.
And the hospitals also were charging kind of like upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, yes.
And so
I'm well aware of this.
this was the insurance company's way of kind of like trying to control that.
Yes.
Um, what were your thoughts on that?
Uh, how can I put this? Yes, if you design a human system of some kind, there will be those who figure out how to exploit the system, and clearly, lots of exploitation goes on. The current healthcare system is being ripped off. Aaron spent some time as part of getting his postdoctoral hours in a place that warehouses the elderly, and there are all kinds of rip-offs that go on in that industry. Mental health professional will stop by the bed of somebody who's comatose practically, and then they'll bill for an hour of psychotherapy because the psychologist has gone into the room and said 2 words of hello to a comatose body lying there. So yes, rip-offs go out, and yes, we should try to contain waste and stupidity and bad behavior in any system that we're attached to. But managed care does its own bad behavior that I was hating. Managed care started with the presumption that everybody is a ripoff artist and they're going to have to justify every breath they take and every damn thing they do. They're going to have to turn in treatment plans. They're going to have to get their sessions justified in small batches and only a few at a time. And we'll look at them again. And if we think they should probably just be put on tranquilizing medication, we'll tell them they have to terminate the therapy and send them to a psychiatrist because there are pills they can take that don't cost very much, and that'll do as good for them as the psychotherapy will. And my favorite example is a colleague who reported this to the Committee for the Advancement of the Practice of Psychology, that he had asked for pre-approval of a visit with a client, a new client. He saw the client. She talked about having trouble sleeping and having panic attacks. So they approved 6 visits for her, and he had to get more approval if he hadn't succeeded in doing some behavioral interventions that helped her to sleep and calmed her panic attacks. He came back in the 4th visit, saying she had come in for the 4th visit. He wanted to alert them that he was going to ask for more than 6 visits, and she had had a dream of her father molesting her sexually, and it felt very real to her. And when she woke up, she started to get flooded with memories of her father parading around naked in her bedroom when she was a little girl, and the meaning of the dream started to become very real. That it was not unlikely that this happened, and she was now full of panic, and she was crying, and she had uncontrolled weeping in the session. And he turned in the application, and a supervising case manager got back to him very quickly and said, look, this is going to cost us a fortune if you keep working with this woman. She's going to continue in therapy. You find some way to seal her over. We'll give you the last 2 visits we told you could have, but you need to tell her that the imagination can be a wild thing, and she should never believe in the integrity of her own daydreams. Daydreams like that are very common, and if her panics are still bad, she should get some anti-anxiety medication from her general practitioner. He'll dispense them to her and close the case. So I think as on the receiving end as a psychologist, we were more subjected to that. None of us were doing the big kinds of ripoffs you were talking about. Very few of us had much experience in hospitalizing people. I don't think as a group we wanted people to stay any longer than they wanted to. I was just opposed philosophically. I thought the best person to decide whether they should continue was the client, not the insurance company. I didn't want them to decide arbitrarily whether my client should continue. I didn't want to decide whether my client would continue. I thought a part of the kind of relationship I wanted with clients was this was their decision. So I would see them in a way that left the decision in their hands. Is that responsive to what you asked, or you got any
Yes.
other questions about that topic?
No,
Okay,
I think
thank
that's good. Thank you.
I just want to make a comment that the reason Arthur doesn't need a bill collector is because he's his own bill collection agency. He has the best collection of stickers, you know, past due or partial
Yeah.
payments accepted. Yeah, they're very good.
Yeah, I learned you can buy stickers online that are put on any kind of billing if people are late. The first one is very gracious, overlooked. Would you consider making a payment at this time? Then one is second notice. We don't want to keep reminding you. Call if there's any problem you're having, call and work out an arrangement, or please, you may just have been forgetful. Make the payment now. You can just stick these stickers on statements.
Yeah, when I was his psych assistant, some guy owed us a few bucks. It wasn't a lot. And the guy finally paid up, and in the memo it said asshole.
Huh.
Uh,
So, are we done for today? I guess we are.
I think we are.
I think
All
so.
right, to be continued next week.
Okay.
Bye, guys.